Welcome and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it may be, wherever you are. While you are listening to this, while you are watching this, I wish you good, whatever. Welcome to Guarding the Heart with Jerry Aiken. I am Jerry Aiken, the pastor of Pierce Chapel and the host of this podcast, which is now on its second episode. And of course, our theme verse here is Proverbs 4:23, which says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." So that is kind of the focus of the podcast here, is that we will tend to the heart, that we will consider what goes on in our minds and in the inner life, and that we will use that space and give attention to it in a way that honors and glorifies God, brings us into right relationship with Jesus Christ, and that what we do in the world will be born of that, will flow from that. Because let's be honest, we can say that we are Christians, we are believers, that we want to do good things, but unless that is born within us, unless something happens in the inner life, all of our works and our efforts are in vain. So let's begin today. Let's begin this episode with a word of prayer. Wherever you are, please pray with me. You can close your eyes, you can bow your head, unless, of course, you're driving. If you're listening to this podcast while you're driving, please don't close your eyes. Keep your eyes open. But in your heart, pray with me. Holy Father, gracious gardener, you have planted something within us. Something that blooms and yields fruit, yet something we must take care to maintain. May this shoot of life, growing from the very vine of Jesus, run its root more deeply into our hearts. Winds blow, storms arise, and even the soil of our hearts can become compromised, sometimes hardened, constricting, and limiting what you seek to grow there. Sometimes weakened and made sloppy like a mudslide, too fickle and unstable to support your work within us. So our hearts become. But we ask that you enable us to maintain healthy, viable soil. Allow us to weather the rains so that the life and the word that you have planted within us may blossom and bloom. Amen. This podcast is an attempt to do something a little more conversational. About a year and a half ago, I launched the podcast Fruit from the Vine, which is still available on different venues: Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, Heart Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm sure you can find it there. But the intent for that was simply I would read a scripture and then allow space for prayer and for reflection. And there were definitely some people who appreciated that. But I had a few people come up to me and say, well, we were thinking it would be more like a talk show, more like a radio type, where we're hearing you discuss things. And I can understand why they thought that. I do midweek meditations on Facebook and on Instagram, and they're sort of like weekly devotional moments, kind of like this, except condensed down to about 2 or 3 minutes. And so they were thinking maybe the podcast would be a bigger thing. Well, this right here, Guarding Your Heart with Jerry Aiken, is hopefully an attempt to remedy that, to to be a little bit more conversational. As I mentioned in the last episode, I do plan to have guests on here. Some of them, to begin with, will be staff members here at the church. We will be talking about what it means to have the mind of Christ, what it means to be mission-minded, what it means to be godly leaders in our home, especially for our children or our spouses. If you have children or spouses, we will cover a range of topics in the coming episodes. But we're just kind of getting started here. And what I'm finding out right now is that having a podcast is almost kind of like talking to yourself and then letting everybody hear it. Having a conversation with yourself and then releasing it for the world to hear, or at least for the 8 people who subscribe to this podcast. And it's a little bit weird. I'm not going to lie. It's a little bit weird to sit here and talk about things knowing that I'm just looking at a wall. I'm looking at a camera and a wall behind it, and there's nobody to receive these words in the present moment. But my hope is that you tune in, that you lock in, and that something that is said here or discussed here will resonate. Maybe I won't feel that way so much when I'm conversing with someone else here in the room when I do have guests, but that remains to be seen. Either way, all of that is pretty appropriate for today's conversation, which is about conversation. Particularly, I want to talk about something that Paul says in the book of Colossians. He is talking to the church there in Colossae, and in chapter 4, verse 6, he says, "Let your conversation be always full of grace, comma." Let's pause right there. How can our conversations be full of grace? That's a very good question for today, for this world we live in, for our society, for 2024, a very intense election year. How can our conversations be full of grace? I don't know that I have the perfect answer for that. All I can say about it is we have to be very intentional, because it is easy, extremely easy, to let grace fly out the window when we're talking to other people. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but everybody seems on edge, at least the people that I encounter, even the people that I admire. There are a lot of people that I love and look up to and sometimes come to for counsel or for wisdom, or, maybe I just interact with and I know that they have this warmth and positivity that I can kind of absorb. But it seems like even the people that I really look for that in are capable of putting off some very negative energy. I don't know how else to put that. And I'm not pointing the finger, because I really see it in myself too. I see it with myself. I've caught myself quite a few times at home. And that's one thing, like who you are at home is that's a revelation, right? Like you can be one person at church, and you can be one person at work, and you can be one person here and there when you go out in public or around your friends. When you're at home and you let that guard down and who you are in that moment, that's really revealing of what's in the heart. And I've caught myself at home snapping, being impatient, raising my voice. And, this is, I'm being kind of confessional here, but I don't think I'm telling you anything that you wouldn't say, yeah, I know what you mean, Jerry. Because there's an intensity to this age that we live in. There is a lot of conflict, things that, maybe a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ago, we could easily say, well, agree to disagree, or, that's your opinion, this is mine. Nowadays, we don't do that. Nowadays, it's almost become kind of like, the lines have been drawn in the sand, pick a side. And while I don't like doing that, I do understand that as values are attacked, as truth is attacked, you do have to be bold. You do. The problem with that is when you become bold and when you do take a stand and when you do realize, okay, somebody has drawn a line in the sand and I have to be clear where I stand on it. Rather than speaking the truth in love, it's easier just to speak the truth in anger. Speak the truth and villainize the person that's on the other side of it. And when we get used to thinking in that pattern, when we get used to talking in that way, then all of a sudden we find ourselves talking that way and thinking in that pattern when it's not even necessary. And we find ourselves being grumpy and snapping at people who are not opposed to us. They're just simply in the line of fire. And that's very unfortunate. So this verse from Paul, let your conversation be always full of grace, I think it makes us pause and say, okay, if we're going to talk to someone, if we're going to speak to someone, let's be mindful of where they are. Not just who they are, which is important, because who are they? No matter who you're talking to, they are a child of God. They are a creation of God. But also, where are they? They're on a journey just like all of us, and they may not be at the same place on the journey that you're at. And so when you speak to them, you have to be mindful of that as well. So just as God has shown us grace, as God has said, hey, look, I know you mess up. I know that you do stupid things, but I love you anyway. And I'm going to forgive you, and I'm going to show you grace and mercy. In the same way, we have to show that in our conversations with each other. But Paul doesn't conclude the sentence there. That's not the whole verse. He doesn't just say, let your conversations be always full of grace. He continues. He says, seasoned with salt. What a weird phrase. Seasoned with salt so that you may know how to answer everyone. Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth. He was talking to believers. You are the ones who give life its pleasant flavor. That's the burden of responsibility he put on us. You are the salt of the earth. Make the earth a more pleasant place, a more tasteful place. Make the earth a place that has pleasant flavor because you are in it. You are the salt of the earth. And here Paul says, make sure your conversations are seasoned with salt. Don't come at somebody seasoned with vinegar, seasoned with, bitter, whatever flavor it is that makes things bitter. I don't know, lemon peel, sour. Lemon is sour. There's a lot of flavors that we can say we don't like, right? Cilantro for me. I don't really mind cilantro so much as the fact that I got sick from eating it once, and so now when I taste it, it's repulsive. I will stomach it because my wife likes it so much. So I'll deal with cilantro in the pico de gallo or whatever we've got going on. But when something has made you sick before, you don't necessarily want to go right back to it. And so in thinking about that with our words, with our conversations, again, it puts a responsibility on us to make sure that what we say doesn't reignite something horrible for somebody or something bitter, that we're not triggering people with our hastiness towards judgment or our condescending tone or whatever may open wounds. Let your conversations be full of grace, seasoned with salt. Okay, it is time to take a humor break. Gotta love that cartoon music, right? Well, that lets you know that this is a lighter section of the show. As I said in the last episode, life is heavy. Life has a lot of stuff that can weigh us down and make us feel so serious all the time. So it's important for us to stop and think about things that are funny. Find some humor in life. Look on some of the lighter things and kind of laugh at how ridiculous it all may be. So having said that, today's story comes from right here in the great state of Georgia, from Chatham County. There was an alert, a call made into the local police department in Blackledge, Georgia, from someone who said there was an alligator in their driveway. Now, if you're from Georgia, particularly South Georgia, very particularly South Georgia near a body of water, you know that this is a thing. Like, you could have an alligator walking down the street in your neighborhood, coming up into your backyard, and that in itself is pretty scary. I lived for 3 years just outside of Cordele, Georgia, and while I was living there, there was an alligator one day walking down the interstate, walking on I-75, and the police had to be called to come get the alligator out of the interstate. So it happens. You might not think it's funny. This is not a humor moment for you, but I'm going somewhere with this, okay? A lady called and reported an alligator in her driveway. The police came. How did they deal with the situation? They arrested the alligator. I'm not sure that they read the Miranda rights. They probably should have, just so the alligator didn't say anything that could be used against them later. But what they did do was they restrained the alligator and they placed him in the back of a patrol car. I'm just trying to imagine this. I'm trying to picture this. Did they hold his head down as they put him in the car so he wouldn't hit it? This is true. I'm not making this up. They put this alligator in the back of the patrol car and drove him to the river and put him back in the river there. So all is well. It ends well. But again, just a ridiculous moment here on planet Earth, where they arrested an alligator and relocated him. So, yeah, senseless, pointless break for humor, but was it really pointless? We need to laugh sometimes. We need to chuckle. So, again, this has been a humor moment. Okay, another thing that I want to say about this verse in Colossians 4, verse 6, where Paul says, let your conversations always be full of grace. Let them be seasoned with salt. I want to take this verse and flip it around a second. We talk about the seasoning part, right? But let's talk about saltiness. Salt is good because it adds flavor, but what is one of the drawbacks from salt? That it can be harmful if there's too much of it, right? Too much salt can be damaging. And so that's where I want to go next with this. Too many words are never a good thing. And that's why I'm looking at the stopwatch here to make sure that this podcast doesn't go too long. Too many words are never a good thing. There are a lot of wise sayings, proverbs that talk about the multitude of words. There is a lack of wisdom. A more common proverb, a modern proverb, is better to keep one mouth shut and to be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. It's always good to rein it in when it comes to words, particularly when we are talking, and we may say something that could wound somebody or hurt somebody. In that situation, it's better to use fewer words. When I first felt the call to ministry, I remember I was working a job in a cubicle in a call center, and I told the lady in the cubicle next to me that I was going to be a preacher, and her response was, I don't see it. The reason she said that was because she said that I was very quiet. She said, I don't know how you're going to get up in front of people once a week and talk for 20 or 30 minutes. And I kind of understood where she was coming from. But see, the thing for me was I wasn't quiet because I didn't have anything to say. I was quiet because I was afraid that what I might have to say might do more harm than good. So being a preacher gave me the chance to really think about, okay, if I'm going to talk for 20 or 30 minutes straight, I'm going to think for an entire week about what I'm going to say first. To this day, people still tell me, I hear you preach on Sunday mornings, and then I see you during the week, and I never would have imagined that you're quiet, but you are. If you know me personally, you might know that. If you're listening to this podcast or you hear me preach and that's your only interaction with me, you probably don't know that. But it's really, I don't know that it's intentional. Maybe it's just a personality thing. But I'm grateful that my teeth bite my tongue as often as they do. Because too many words can do you in. Just like too much salt can do you in. Why do we feel the need to talk so much? Why do we feel the need to utter everything that comes into our mind or into our heart? When we see someone post something on social media that we don't agree with, why do we feel the need to correct them or to speak about it or address it in some way? Why? What are we thinking that our words are going to do other than agitate people? Because if you're not saying something positive and uplifting and encouraging, if you're not saying something to remind people of the grace of Jesus Christ, what are your words doing exactly? What is your intention? Just something to think about. From time to time, I'm going to quote from some books. And last episode, I talked about Ruth Haley Barton and her book, Sacred Rhythm. This week, I'm going to talk about Richard J. Foster, one of my favorite authors. He wrote this book, Freedom of Simplicity, amongst many other great books. One of his best known is Celebration of Discipline. It's a classic. Can't recommend his books enough. But in Freedom of Simplicity, he talks about what it means to live a more simple, a more quiet, a more thoughtful and reflective life, and how that can be not only good for your soul, but it can be a good witness in the world. Again, guard your heart above all else, because everything you do flows from it. And in this book, Freedom of Simplicity, one of the great things that Foster says here, he says, he's talking about silence. He's extolling the virtues of silence. And if you watch the last episode, we talked about rhythm and rest and there's silence in the rest. But he's talking about that. But he says one of the reasons that we refuse that, one of the reasons that we can hardly bear to remain silent, we have to say something, right? One of the reasons, he says, is because silence makes us feel so helpless. We are accustomed to relying upon words to manage and control others. A frantic stream of words flows from us in an attempt to straighten others out. Isn't that the truth? Just look at social media. Even some of your best friends, even some of the people you look up to the most, if you're honest, you know that they've posted some stuff that make you cringe from time to time, right? You know that you've posted some stuff probably that will make you cringe. And why? Because you're trying to correct people's thinking. You're trying to make them think like you do. And I understand there is truth that we have to live into, and we want people to know that truth. But so often we fall into the trap of just let me talk and talk and talk, and people will come around to thinking the way that I do. So Foster says we're accustomed to relying upon words to manage and control others. A frantic stream of words flows from us in an attempt to straighten others out. And then he says, we want so desperately for them to agree with us, to see things our way. And we evaluate people, judge people, and condemn people. We devour people with our words. Silence is one of the deepest disciplines of the Spirit because it puts a stopper on that. In other words, we want people to agree with us so much. We want affirmation, we want validation, and the more people agree with us, the better we feel about what we believe. And so we just talk, and we express, and we say all of these things as if we're going to change somebody's mind. But in reality, we're devouring people with our words. Too much salt in our conversation is not a good thing. Let your conversations be seasoned with salt. Use words that lift people up, that point to Christ, that reveal God's love. Use words in that way. And then when you can't, stop using words. Just be silent. Let love speak for itself. Let actions speak for love. And let silence become one of the deepest and greatest disciplines of the Holy Spirit, because that silence will put a stopper on all the foolish things that might fall out of your mouth otherwise. And with that, I'm going to stop talking myself because I've gone over my time and I've said enough. But I look forward to saying more the next time you tune in, either through the podcast or on YouTube, watching on video. And if you do have any questions, any comments, any insights, feel free to send them to me, jerry@piercechapel.com. I'd love to address your thoughts or try to answer some of your questions on the show if I can. Until then, go in peace, be well, and of course, as always, guard your heart. Take care.